Hey there, this is Rachael Burns. I am a certified divorce financial analyst and certified financial planner, and I wanted to talk today about Social Security. That might not seem like the most exciting subject in the world, but Social Security is something that is important to most of us. It's a really important source of retirement income, and so I get a lot of questions from women specifically who are wondering, how are my Social Security benefits impacted by my change in marital status? So, for example, if they're getting married, if they're getting divorced, or if they become widowed, I hear a lot of questions about, well, what happens to my Social Security as a result of that? And I hear a lot of misconceptions too. So I wanted to give you guys some information that should hopefully clear up a little bit of that confusion. So just to give you a little kind of refresher on how Social Security works. As you're working throughout your lifetime, you're paying into Social Security, and Social Security is keeping track of how much you're earning each year. And by the time you are ready to retire, and by the time you hit Social Security age, they are going to give you a monthly benefit that's based on a few different things. They're going to look at your average earnings during your working years. They're going to look at what year you were born, what year you started Social Security, because it does get impacted by how early or how late you start Social Security benefits. So they apply this formula, and it spits out this number of what you're eligible to get every month, again, based on your earnings history. So if you don't have earnings history, or if you have years that you've taken off of work to raise kids or to help family or whatever, or if you worked part-time for a few years, your average earnings are going to be lower, and that's going to result in a lower Social Security benefit. So that's how that works for you as an individual if you're just a single person. So what happens when you get married? Then you might have some different options. So if you get married, and if you stay married, when you are ready to start taking Social Security benefits, you might have another option here. So again, you can look at your own benefit, which is based on your own earnings history. But let's say your earnings were low. Let's say you only have $1,000 a month benefit in Social Security under your own record. If you're still married, you can potentially get a spousal benefit. And so how that works is they will look at what your spouse would be entitled to, and the spousal benefit is half of that amount. Now that you might be wondering, well, why would I do that if it just takes half away from my spouse? It doesn't take any money away from your spouse. So you have the option of whichever one is higher. So let's look at an example. Let's say that based on my earnings history, I'm eligible for $1,000 a month in my benefit. Well, let's say my spouse worked more, had a higher paying job, whatever. Let's say his benefit is $3,000 a month. So when I hit the age where I'm ready to start taking Social Security, I have an option. I can take 100% of mine, which is $1,000, or I can take 50% of his, which is $1,500. I would rather have $1,500 than $1,000, so I would take my spousal benefit of $1,500. He still has his own benefit. His benefit is not impacted by mine. He gets the same amount of money, he gets the same $3,000 a month, but I get $1,500 instead of $1,000 because I have a spousal benefit. So you might be wondering, okay, well, what happens if you get divorced? It depends on how long you were married. So if you were married under 10 years and you get divorced, it's as if it never happened. When you take Social Security, it's just based on your own earnings. But if you're married for over 10 years and then you get divorced and you don't get remarried, we'll talk about that in a second, but you are still eligible maybe to take a spousal benefit when you retire. And the way that they calculate that is the same as if you guys were still married. So let's say you're married over 10 years, after your 10th anniversary, you get divorced, and then you're 67 and you're ready to start taking Social Security. You can look at what is 100% of yours, what is 50% of my spouse's benefit based on their earnings, and I get whichever one is higher. Again, me taking a spousal benefit does not reduce my spouse's benefit or my ex-spouse's benefit. So if we've been divorced for years and years and I want to take a spousal benefit, he doesn't need to know. He doesn't need to agree to it. It has nothing to do with him. They use his numbers in the calculation, but you don't have to, it has nothing to do with him after that. You don't have to deal with it. Another thing you need to keep in mind about that is if it's just between you and Social Security and you don't need to work it out with your ex, that's not something that needs to be figured out as part of the divorce process. So what I hear often is, oh, well, we need to figure out how we're going to split up the Social Security. Or, my ex says that I'm not going to get a dime, or he's going to take all my Social Security or something. I hear clients make all these assumptions about what's going to happen during their divorce with their Social Security, but Social Security is not an asset that's to be split as part of the divorce process. If you think about it, Social Security is not really an asset that you have right now. Social Security is a promise to pay you a certain amount starting at a future date. So that's not something, it's not like it's an account that you have now that you can pull money out of now. This is like something that's going to happen far off in the future. And so it's not something that needs to be divided because you have your own earnings record, you have your own benefits based on your earnings record. And then you may or may not be eligible for a spousal benefit that's based on their record, but it's not something you need to work out with your ex. You don't need to negotiate what's going to happen to the Social Security. The only time that Social Security comes up during a divorce is if you're currently receiving it and if you're either receiving or paying child support or alimony. But that's a totally separate thing. It's a topic for another day, but Social Security is not an asset that you need to worry about splitting now. And if you get divorced, you may be eligible for a benefit later on. Then I have people who are widowed and they wonder, okay, well, what happens to my Social Security then? So it works similarly to if you were divorced. You don't have to be married 10 years. I think you just have to be married for 9 months. But if you become widowed, again, when you reach retirement age, you have the same two options. You can either take your own benefit based on your own earnings, or you can take a spousal benefit, but instead of 50%, it's 100% of what your spouse would have received. So you get a much bigger bump up if there is, if your spouse had a significantly higher income. I don't recommend that you kill your husband instead of divorce him. That will result in more Social Security benefits for you, but that's not good financial advice. But moral of the story is you can get quite a big bump up in your Social Security benefit by taking a spousal benefit if you're widowed. And then I have kind of other types of scenarios where I have a client recently who was divorced. They were married for over 10 years. They were divorced for a long, long time, like 30 years. And then her ex-husband died. And she had been taking her Social Security benefit already based on her earnings. She had worked, so it didn't make sense to take a spousal benefit based on her, because she was divorced. Her own benefit would have been higher than if she would have taken 50% of his. So she's taking her own benefit, and then he dies. And I told her, hey, do you know that you can take a spousal benefit based on him that's 100% of what he was receiving? And she didn't know that. So we called Social Security, found out it was going to be $500 a month more than what she had been receiving, so she got a nice little raise. I mentioned if you get remarried, that can complicate things. So let's say you get married, you're eligible for a spousal benefit through this marriage. You get divorced. If you then get remarried, then it disqualifies you from taking a benefit based on that previous spouse's earnings history. But you can potentially get a spousal benefit through the new spouse's earnings, depending on the situation. But then if you get divorced to the second one, then sometimes you have the option of like choosing whichever spouse has the highest earnings history. So that is getting a little into the weeds, but the point is here, your Social Security benefit is very dependent on your circumstances. It depends on how much your income was, how much your spouse's income was, what happens in what order things happen. But I highly recommend that you log into the Social Security website and run a statement on yourself. The statement will show an estimate of what your benefits are based on your earnings. It'll show a list of every year that you worked and how much money you made in each year, which is kind of a fun trip down memory lane. But it's good to check that because you want to make sure that your earnings has been reported correctly. If you have some years that are totally off, you can contact Social Security and have them fix that. But it's also just good to know what you can expect in terms of income when you're retired. If you want to know what kind of spousal benefit you may be entitled to, that's a little bit harder to get information on. It's not going to be on your statement. If you're still married, you can have your spouse either run a statement on themselves or call and find out what their benefits would be and what a survivor's benefit would be. But if you call Social Security and you're like, I have clients who are going through a divorce and they want to know what their spousal benefit is. They can't necessarily just call Social Security and be like, what is my ex entitled to, or what would I be entitled to under a spousal benefit? I have been on the phone with Social Security when they were able to divulge that information. But then I've also had calls with them where they weren't willing to divulge that, and they said, oh, you need to call back with the spouse. So I've kind of had some inconsistent experiences calling them, but Social Security's customer service is very helpful and knowledgeable. So call them and they will be able to give you information based on your specific circumstances, which I'm not able to do here. I'm just giving kind of general information and encouraging you to go and get your own, specific details figured out. But yeah, let me know if you have questions. Again, log on to the Social Security website, download your statement, and give them a call if you want more detailed information on that. So I hope that's helpful. Thanks.